Right. I hope you're not going to be annoyed with me in terms of making you redraw your thrust, maybe for the third time. But let's think about the dip of the thrust. So here we have thrust, this one, the very frontal one here. You can see that it pretty much follows the topographic contours. So is it going to be steep or not very steep? Well, it's going to be nearly horizontal. So we've got a thrust that is tipping at a very low angle by opposition to this one, which is much steeper. And you can see here how that thrust sort of follow the contours of these beds here. So if you've got some information about how steep these beds are dipping, then the thrust is probably at a very similar angle. So you can do the calculation and try to remember, but it will be something like 40 degrees or something like that. So if you think about that, is at the front of the line of section, we've got a thrust. Oh, come on. So we've got something like that. And then we've got the first thrust, which is nearly horizontal. Okay? Something like that. Then we've got the second thrust that cuts the contour a bit more. So it's probably at a steeper angle here. So we're going to draw something that is a bit steeper. And then this one, as I said, is going to be at an angle of nearly 50 degrees here. So here we go. I may exaggerate the dip just to facilitate the drawing. Now, what's going to happen to this thrust at depth? How are they going to interact? Like if you take that thing and carry it on, yeah, they're going to intersect each other. Well, okay, let's think about that. Do you think it's going to be something like that? And then these things are going to connect like that? Well, if that's the case, then let's think about the beds here. And we're going to start drawing the beds, which are at an angle of, they are at a very similar angle, okay? So here, except if we, so this is thrust 1, and we've got that thrust here, coming down here. Now what we have here is, if we say that this is the oldest 2, 3, you can see that these rocks are getting younger as you move up that succession. And you can see that except if you bend them very abruptly here, it's going to be very difficult to create a relationship like that. This is something that we talked about when we did the Bristol map, is if you have a succession and you put a thrust through that succession, what you will have, what you should have, and that's something you're going to have to double check for every single of your thrust, you're going to see that as you are, if you are above the thrust, so let's say we offset these beds here, and move them up. Okay, so let's say this is rock 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can see that as you move down along the thrust, you're going to get into rocks that are older and older and older. Okay? In the same way, when you are on the other side of the thrust, if you move down along the thrust, you're going to get into rocks that are older and older and older. That is something that is structurally very important. That's one of the main constraints on the shape of the thrust. And that's what's going to help you draw this one, because you can see that here, when we are going down the thrust, we're going to get into rocks that are younger and younger and younger, which is structurally impossible. That is not possible, so there is a problem with our structure here. The only situation where that would be possible is if originally we had something that was potentially folded. So let's say we've got some beds that are originally folded and we run a thrust through that. So potentially what you will have here is you can see that here, as you go along the frost, you're going to get into rocks that are older, and then you're going to get into rocks that are younger and younger. So except if the rocks have been folded or heavily tilted before the frosting, you will never have this sort of relationship. So that's something you're going to have to check at the scale of your cross-section. And these are the two main constraints you're going to have to follow, is make sure that as you move down the frost, the rocks are getting older, and make sure that the bed thickness are constant. So in that case, you can see that what you're going to have to do here is something like that. This one is going to be the main frost, and these things are going to connect onto that frost here. So it's so here we're going to have all rocks. We are going to follow like that. And potentially you may have at some stage a rock younger than 1 that will appear here. But you can see so let's call it 0. You can see how as we move down the frost here, we are along 1, and then we get into rocks that are older and older. So that is what the front of your section looks like. And this is typical of what we can have when we are at the front of a mountain. And this is exactly what we have here. This is the front of the mountain range. This is the foreland basin. This is the frontal thrust at the front of the mountain range. So you can see that at the very front, we've got this low angle thrust. We've got this clip-on that appear where the rocks have been thrusted at a low angle over the foreland. And then as we get into the mountain, the thrusts are getting steeper and steeper. So make sure what you will have to do now is draw your beds, draw your thrust, and try to continue the beds further at depth, making sure that we keep this relationship. So again, just to illustrate that point, if this is your topography, I think my pen is dying, I'm going to change color. Let's get a bit of green. If you've got a thrust here, and you've got a thrust here, and you've got beds that are dipping this way, then you can draw this bed. So you will have to draw again from the youngest to the oldest, and the youngest. So let's say we're going to draw our thrust like that, and this is going to come potentially like that, and this potentially like that. Try to keep the thickness constant, and you can see that once you've drawn these things, then your thrust, you can see that that constrain the dip of your thrust. If you draw something like that, then you end up in a situation where, let's say, if we draw something like that, again, if we draw something that is at a too low angle, we can see that along the thrust we're going from old rocks to younger rock as we go down the thrust, which is not possible. So we're going to have to adjust the trace of the thrust so that these sort of things do not happen. So we're going to have to do something like that, and potentially down, and potentially other rock units. Based on the thickness, you can have other rocks units appearing. Okay? And here the same, you're going to have your bed here, and they're going to come down and so on. So start from the youngest and go down to the first. You may have to erase and draw again, and erase and draw again. And here again, you know, when you look at what is here, you're going to have this sort of relationship. You see here, for example, that is a correct relationship. This is the thrust. Here, you can see that as we go along the thrust, we get into rocks that are older and older and older. We cannot have something, let's say, we cannot have something where the beds here are deeper, steeper than the thrust. Because again, in that situation, we have as we go down the thrust, the rocks are getting younger, which is not possible. So always keep that in mind. And I think at that point, it's really down to you to draw the whole cross section and try to finish. Keep in mind that, yeah, you're going to have the dip. Try to keep the thickness constant. There's a series of folds here. So we've got a syncline here. We've got another fold here that you're going to have, to keep in mind when you draw your section, in particular if you want to keep the thickness constant. And something important as well is making sure that the offset on the thrust the offset on the thrust is consistent, because something that appears sometimes when you've got low angle thrust is something like that. So let's say these are our rocks, and let's say that these are, okay, I'm gonna do that on the next video.